The knock at the door didn't sound like betrayal, but that's what it brought. I hadn't seen my son Brent in over 6 months, and suddenly he was standing on my porch with a smile too polished to be real. His wife Melanie followed, dressed like she was heading to a brunch with royalty, not visiting an old woman in a modest Nashville home. "We've found the perfect place, Mom," Brent said, like it was good news, a beachfront villa in Charleston. And they wanted me. Not to visit, but to co-sign a $580,000 mortgage. Just a formality, cunt, he called it. But I've lived too long to believe that. Something about their eyes, calculating, rehearsed, set off a quiet alarm in my chest. I didn't know it then, but saying no would unleash a storm I never saw coming. A lawsuit, a betrayal, and a truth too bitter for any mother to face. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the kitchen tiles. Dorothy Harper, 64, sat at her usual spot near the window, sipping black coffee from her favorite chipped mug. The air carried the faint scent of dew and honeysuckle, and the hum of cicadas hadn't yet broken the silence of her modest Nashville neighborhood. It was a peaceful morning, the kind she had grown to treasure in the quiet years since Harold passed. She had just begun a crossword puzzle when the knock came. Not the sharp rap of a stranger, but a confident, rehearsed tap. Brent. She hadn't expected him, not on a Tuesday morning, and certainly not with his wife Melanie in tow. Dorothy rose slowly, her knees aching the way they always did after gardening. She opened the door to find Brent, dressed in business casual, holding a paper bag from a downtown bakery. "Mom," he greeted, his voice syrupy sweet, "brought you your favorite... the cinnamon raisin." Melanie offered a small wave, sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes already scanning the room as if taking inventory. Brent followed, his smile unwavering. Dorothy managed a polite nod and stepped aside. "I already made breakfast," she said, motioning toward the kitchen table. "That's okay, we figured we'd surprise you," Brent said. "You've been on my mind lately." Dorothy knew better than to believe that. She hadn't heard from him in weeks. Not since she called to say her roof had leaked again. He'd mumbled something about being tied up and hadn't called back. Melanie settled on the edge of the couch, her legs crossed neatly, her phone in hand. Brent hovered behind her, glancing at Dorothy's well-worn recliner like it offended his sense of taste. "So," Dorothy began, easing back into her chair, "what brings you two here this early?" Brent leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees like a man about to deliver a pitch. "We found it, Mom. The perfect house." Dorothy blinked. "House?" "In Charleston," Melanie said, her voice low and glossy like a magazine page. 4 bedrooms, ocean view, big enough for the kids to have their own space when they visit. Dorothy's heart pinched. The twins, Michael and Emily, hadn't visited her in over a year. Brent reached into the paper bag and pulled out a sleek real estate brochure. "It's everything we've dreamed of, and we're ready to make it ours." Dorothy looked down at the glossy pages, the pristine white porch, the wraparound balcony, the sea beyond. It was beautiful, too beautiful. Her fingers trembled slightly as she handed it back. "I'm happy for you," she said carefully. "It looks lovely." Brent nodded, then exchanged a look with Melanie. Dorothy saw it, the silent cue between them. "There's one small thing," Brent added, voice softening. "We need a cosigner for the mortgage." Dorothy stared at him. "A cosigner?" "It's just a formality," Melanie chimed in. "Brent's income more than covers the payments. But with lending rules the way they are, you have equity in this house," Brent said. "It would help us qualify." Dorothy folded her hands tightly in her lap. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. "How much is the loan?" $580, Brent said casually. "But again, you wouldn't be responsible for a cent." Dorothy's throat tightened. "That's a lot of money." "It's just paperwork," Brent said. "You're not paying anything. You're just helping us get through the bank's red tape." Melanie's smile tightened. "You'd be giving your grandchildren a better life." Dorothy felt her spine stiffen. She looked at the walls around her. Faded photos, hand-stitched curtains, furniture Harold had picked out with pride. Every inch of this house carried their history, their sacrifices. She thought of the years she'd packed leftovers for lunch to save money, of Harold patching the roof himself because they couldn't afford a contractor. "I'll need to think about it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Brent's smile faltered. "Mom," I said, "I'll think about it." There was a long silence. Melanie rose and smoothed her blouse. "Of course, take your time." Brent forced another smile and set the brochure on the coffee table. "We're meeting with the realtor on Friday. Just let us know before then." Dorothy didn't walk them to the door. When it clicked shut, the silence returned, but it was no longer comforting. She stared at the glossy picture of the Charleston house, its windows gleaming like eyes watching her. It was beautiful. It was everything they wanted. And somehow, it terrified her. Dorothy stared at the brochure long after the door shut. The house was beautiful, absurdly so. It looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine, not something real people owned, especially not people who asked their 64-year-old mother to co-sign a $580,000 mortgage. Her hand brushed the corner of the brochure, hesitant, thoughtful. A small note had slipped between the pages. She hadn't noticed it earlier. It was a typed letter, brief and overly formal, an acknowledgement of receipt for a $60,000 earnest money deposit on the Charleston property, dated 2 weeks ago. Dorothy's breath caught in her throat. 2 weeks ago? They'd already placed a deposit before even asking her? Her heart pounded as the realization set in. They hadn't come for a conversation. They'd come for a confirmation. An expectation disguised as a favor. The decision had already been made, her role pre-written. Dorothy rose from her chair, the note trembling in her hands. She walked to the kitchen and set it on the counter, needing distance from it. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup as her thoughts spiraled. How could they be so sure she would say yes? The answer landed with a dull weight, because she always had. When Brent asked for help with his college tuition after blowing his scholarship, she'd drained her retirement savings. When he wanted to start a business and needed seed money, she'd mortgaged the house, Harold's house. That venture failed within a year. She'd said yes so many times, no had stopped sounding like an option. The doorbell rang again. Dorothy's stomach turned. She opened it slowly to find Melanie standing alone on the porch, arms crossed, expression as polished as her pearl earrings. "Forgot my sunglasses," Melanie said with a tight smile. "Thought I left them on the coffee table." Dorothy stepped aside without a word. Melanie walked in with the ease of someone who considered the house an extension of her own. She spotted the sunglasses within seconds but didn't pick them up right away. Instead, she turned to Dorothy and offered a sugar-sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know, Brent was a little worried coming over today," she said, brushing invisible dust off her purse. "He thought maybe you'd feel pressured." Dorothy tilted her head. "And yet, here you are. Deposit made, paperwork drawn up." Melanie's smile widened slightly, but her eyes narrowed. "We're just trying to move fast. In this market, a house like that won't stay available long." Dorothy folded her arms. $60,000 is a lot of confidence. Melanie walked closer, her heels silent on the old hardwood. She lowered her voice, calm and deliberate. "Look, I know you've always been the one Brent counts on. And we're grateful, truly. But this house, it's a step forward, a fresh start, for all of us. Especially for the kids." Dorothy didn't respond. Melanie leaned in slightly, her tone dipping into something sharper. "You wouldn't say no to your own son, not after everything you've done for him. I mean, your family. You wouldn't turn your back on blood, would you?" And there it was. That subtle twist of the knife, buried beneath layers of civility. Dorothy's breath caught. Not in surprise, but in recognition. Melanie wasn't asking. She was demanding, with a smile, with a compliment, with the unspoken assumption that refusal would make Dorothy the villain in her own family. Melanie turned to leave, sunglasses in hand. At the doorway, she glanced back and delivered the final blow with a perfectly rehearsed smile. "You'll come around. You always do." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving a silence far more deafening than before. Dorothy sank into her recliner, the familiar leather creaking beneath her. Her fingers rubbed her temples, trying to soothe the dull ache rising behind her eyes. She wasn't angry yet, not quite, but something simmered beneath the surface, not just confusion or hurt, but indignation. A long-silenced voice inside her had begun to stir. They didn't just expect her help. They assumed it. They believed her compliance was a given, an inherited duty, as though her financial security was theirs by default. It wasn't just the money, it was the erasure of her choices. The phone buzzed beside her. A text from Brent. "Don't overthink it, Mom. This is a chance for all of us. Love you." Dorothy stared at the screen, unmoving. The subtext was clear. Don't ask questions. Don't resist. Just sign. That text wasn't love. It was control wrapped in sentiment. She deleted it without replying. That night, as twilight painted the sky in bruised purples and deep indigo, Dorothy stood by the window, staring out at the quiet street. A faint breeze stirred the curtains. The neighborhood was still, familiar, real. Unlike the fantasy house in Charleston, unlike the fantasy Brent and Melanie were so desperate to keep alive. And she was beginning to wonder, how far would they go to make sure she played her part? Dorothy sat at her kitchen table, the Charleston brochure pushed to the side, its edges curling slightly under the weight of a thick packet of legal papers. Her glasses sat low on her nose as she scanned each page of the mortgage documents Brent had left behind. The fine print was dense, designed to confuse, filled with terms like joint liability, default conditions, and primary collateral. Her eyes stopped on one sentence. Cosigner shall be jointly and severally liable for the full value of the loan, including interest and penalties in the event of default. Dorothy set the page down slowly, jointly and severally liable. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her cup of tea. Cold. She hadn't even noticed how much time had passed. She reread the line twice, then a third time, as if the meaning would change. But it didn't. If Brent and Melanie couldn't pay, the entire $580,000 would fall squarely on her shoulders. The phone rang, sharp and sudden. Dorothy jumped. The screen showed Brent's name. She hesitated before letting it go to voicemail. It rang again, then again. Texts followed. "Hey, Mom, just checking if you had a chance to look everything over." "Everything okay? Let us know if you have questions." "We really need an answer by Friday. Don't want to lose the house." She didn't respond. She needed space, time, logic, none of which Brent seemed willing to give her. Minutes later, another message pinged in, this time from Melanie. "Hi, Dorothy. Just thinking about how amazing it will be when we're all settled in Charleston. You'll love the guest room. Ocean view." Dorothy stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the reply button. Then another message came. "Brent's getting worried. I know this is a lot, but we're counting on you. Please don't overcomplicate things." Still, Dorothy said nothing. She placed the phone face down and returned to the documents. She scribbled notes in the margins, underlined terms she didn't fully understand, and circled sections that made her stomach twist. By the time the sun had started to set, she felt emotionally drained. Her hand reached for the phone again, but this time not to call Brent. Instead, she dialed Gloria, her neighbor of over a decade. Gloria answered on the first ring. "Dorothy? Everything okay?" "No," Dorothy said honestly. "I think I need someone to talk to. Can you come over?" 10 minutes later, Gloria arrived, a Tupperware of blueberry muffins in one hand, a firm hug in the other. They sat together at the kitchen table, the legal documents spread out before them like evidence from a crime scene. Gloria adjusted her glasses and leaned in. "Sweetheart, this is no small favor. This is them asking you to mortgage your entire future." Dorothy nodded, her voice quiet. "They said it's just a formality." Gloria gave a sharp laugh. "That's the oldest lie in the book, right up there with the checks in the mail. You know what jointly and severally liable means, right?" Dorothy swallowed. "It means I'm fully responsible, even if they default." "Exactly," Gloria said. "And you think they'll tell the bank, 'Oh no, go after us, not dear old Mom.'" Not likely. Dorothy looked down at her hands, the veins more visible now, skin thinner than it used to be. These hands had packed lunches, paid bills, held her husband's hand as he slipped away. Now they were expected to sign away everything she'd worked for. "They've already put down a deposit," she said, voice low, $60,000, before even asking me. Gloria shook her head. "They think they've boxed you in." "They're not bad people," Dorothy said quietly, though the words rang hollow even to her ears. Gloria reached over and took her hand. "I'm not saying they are, but people make bad choices, and sometimes they expect others to clean up after them." Dorothy looked at the living room, where Brent had played with Legos on the floor, where he'd watched cartoons in his pajamas, where he'd taken his first steps. "I raised him better than this," she whispered. Gloria didn't respond. She just gave Dorothy's hand a gentle squeeze. The phone buzzed again, another text from Melanie. "I know you're thinking it over, but Brent's really stressed. He doesn't need this pressure right now." Then, seconds later, another one. "Are you ignoring us? We're trying to include you in our future. Don't be selfish." Dorothy's jaw clenched. Selfish. That word echoed in her head like a slap. "I think," she said, setting the phone aside, "I need to stop thinking like a mother and start thinking like a person." Gloria smiled. Now that's the Dorothy I remember. The air in the kitchen had grown heavier, as if the weight of the documents on the table had seeped into the walls themselves. Dorothy stared at her phone, Melanie's words still glowing on the screen like a threat disguised as guilt. "Don't be selfish." That word scratched at something deep inside her, but before she could respond, Gloria leaned forward, her face unreadable. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said slowly, folding her hands, "and I hate being the one to say it." Dorothy looked up. "What is it?" Gloria hesitated, then continued. "Do you remember my friend Barbara, the one from church who moved to Kentucky after losing her house?" Dorothy nodded. "Of course. That was such a shock." "Well," Gloria said, voice dropping, "it wasn't the bank that surprised her. It was Melanie." Dorothy blinked. "What do you mean?" Gloria took a breath. "A few years ago, Melanie convinced Barbara to let her use her name to co-sign a private business loan. Melanie said it was just temporary, that the money was guaranteed by some investment she was making. Barbara trusted her. They were friendly, maybe too friendly. She signed without fully understanding the terms. Dorothy's chest tightened. And Melanie defaulted," Gloria said, "completely ghosted Barbara. The bank came after her. She lost everything." Dorothy's hand went to her mouth. "I didn't know until after the fact," Gloria added. "Barbara was so embarrassed. She didn't want it getting around, but she told me because she knew I was friends with you. She said if Melanie ever asked for anything, tell Dorothy to run." Dorothy sat in stunned silence, the pieces rearranging themselves in her mind. Melanie's slick demeanor, her polished charm, the subtle pressure. This wasn't new. It was practiced. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I didn't want to believe she'd try it again. But now..." Gloria glanced toward the kitchen counter where the documents lay. "Now I think it's exactly the same playbook." Dorothy rose slowly from her chair, needing to move, to breathe. Her mind buzzed with a storm of suspicion and memories. Brent's nervous laughter, Melanie's calculated smiles, the way they had both looked at her house like it was already sold. Suddenly, a noise came from the living room. Dorothy froze, a faint shuffle. Too deliberate to be the house settling. Her heart began to race. Gloria, sensing it too, stood up and followed as Dorothy walked carefully toward the hallway. The front door was closed, but the patio door barely open. Dorothy's breath caught. She walked into the living room, her steps slow and careful. The coffee table now had an unfamiliar folder on it. The legal papers were no longer the same ones from earlier. Gloria picked it up. "This wasn't here a few minutes ago." Dorothy's voice was tight. "I didn't hear anyone come in." Gloria looked down at the doorknob, then back up. "Does Brent have a key?" Dorothy swallowed. "Yes, from after Harold passed. I gave him a spare for emergencies." They both stood in silence, the implications sinking in like a chill. He had come into her house without permission, quietly, secretly, while she was just in the other room. Dorothy opened the folder. The documents inside looked identical, but the signature page was different. The date line had been filled in, marked 3 days prior. Her signature had been forged. "Oh my God," she whispered. Gloria took the papers from her. "He changed the date. He's trying to backdate it. This is criminal." A chill crept up Dorothy's spine. "Why would he do this?" "To make it look like you agreed," Gloria said grimly. "Like you signed already, and now you're just backing out." Dorothy backed up and sank into her armchair, the room spinning around her. She felt violated, not just physically, but emotionally. Her own son had crept into her home like a thief, not for jewelry or cash, but for her trust, her name, her life savings. "I can't believe this," she said softly. Gloria crouched beside her. "You need to change your locks, and you need to call a lawyer." Dorothy's voice trembled. "This is my son, Gloria." "I know," Gloria said, her voice firm. "But he just walked into your house and tried to frame you into signing away your home. You need to protect yourself. Right now." Dorothy's fingers closed around the arm of the chair. Her breath was shallow, her thoughts fragmented. But one thing was crystal clear. This was no longer about guilt or family. This was war. She looked toward the patio door still ajar, the breeze blowing softly through the sheer curtain. If Brent was willing to sneak into her home, what else was he willing to do? Dorothy hadn't slept much. She lay awake most of the night listening for sounds, phantom footsteps, creaking floorboards, anything that might suggest Brent had come back. The thought of him walking into her home like a stranger still made her skin crawl. By mid-morning, she had replaced the lock on the patio door herself and left a message for a local locksmith to replace every lock on the property. Her coffee had long gone cold when the phone rang. The name on the screen took her breath. Caroline Marks. She hadn't seen Caroline in years, not since Brent abruptly ended their relationship and married Melanie within months. Dorothy answered, heart pounding. "Caroline?" she said, unsure if she was surprised or nervous. "Hi, Mrs. Harper. I hope this isn't a bad time." No, Dorothy said quickly. "Of course not. It's been a long time." "It has," Caroline replied, "and I know this is out of the blue, but I heard something that made me think I should talk to you, in person." Dorothy paused. "Is this about Brent?" A silence, then a quiet, "Yes." Dorothy felt her stomach knot. They agreed to meet at a small cafe near downtown. Dorothy arrived early, choosing a quiet booth near the window. The place was nearly empty, its worn wood floors and antique mirrors, lending it a sense of quiet dignity. She clutched her mug of tea with both hands, trying to calm the nerves that fluttered in her chest. Caroline walked in 10 minutes later, looking older but composed. Her auburn hair was shorter now, her frame more confident, more grounded. She spotted Dorothy and approached with a soft smile. "Mrs. Harper," she said warmly, sliding into the seat across from her. "It's good to see you." "You too, Caroline," Dorothy said sincerely. "You look well." Caroline gave a half smile. "Life's been an education." They made small talk for a few minutes. Jobs, family, where Caroline had ended up after the breakup. Then the air shifted and her tone grew serious. "I'm sorry to bring up old wounds," Caroline said, "but I need to tell you something about Brent, something important." Dorothy nodded, bracing herself. "After Brent and I split up," Caroline began, "he called me about a year later. Said he was in trouble. Deep financial trouble. Credit cards maxed out, his business had failed, and he was facing bankruptcy. He was desperate." Dorothy's heart sank. "He never told me. I didn't think he would. He said he couldn't ask you, that you'd paid your dues. That's the phrase he used." Dorothy looked down, feeling that old ache of being both invisible and indispensable in her son's life. "I gave him a small loan," Carolyn continued, "just to keep his apartment," he said. "He never paid it back. A few months later, I found out he filed for bankruptcy." Dorothy felt the blood drain from her face. He told me he'd bounced back, that his new tech job was thriving. Caroline shook her head. He's been in and out of jobs. Overextended, juggling debt. Melanie helped cover some of it at first, but from what I hear now, even that's dried up. Dorothy felt like the cafe around her had gone silent. Every sound, clinking cups, distant conversation, faded to nothing. Caroline leaned forward. I work in real estate law now. A friend of mine handles high-value property transactions. She mentioned Brent's name recently, said his loan application for a house in Charleston was denied. Bad credit, high debt-to-income ratio. Dorothy swallowed. He told me he was pre-approved. He wasn't. That's why he needs a cosigner. No bank will touch him without someone else's name attached. Dorothy blinked. He didn't just ask. He walked into my house with papers already drawn up. He already made a down payment, $60,000. Caroline's eyebrows rose. Then he's more desperate than I thought. Dorothy exhaled shakily. He used to be so kind. As a boy. Thoughtful. I remember, Caroline said gently, but somewhere along the way he got very good at asking for help while hiding the truth. Dorothy nodded slowly, the betrayal settling in deeper, now thicker. I thought I was being paranoid. You're not, Caroline said firmly. You're being targeted. They sat in silence for a few moments before Caroline added, I didn't come here to dredge up bad memories. I came because I remember how good you were to me. You treated me like family, even when Brent didn't. Dorothy reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Thank you for coming. Really. Caroline gave a small smile. Be careful, Mrs. Harper. You're not just a mother to Brent. You're a safety net he's hoping you won't cut. Caroline hesitated before continuing, her eyes darting briefly toward the cafe window as if to make sure they were still alone. Her voice dropped lower. There's more, Mrs. Harper. And I debated whether to tell you. But after hearing what Brent's been asking you to do, I think you need to know the whole truth. Dorothy sat still, her tea forgotten. The weight of Caroline's words pressed down like lead. About 6 months after Brent and I stopped talking, Caroline said, a friend of mine, she's a notary, mentioned something odd. She'd been asked to stamp documents with your name on them. Your name, your signature. On loan collateral documents. Dorothy blinked. Wait, what? Caroline nodded slowly. It was for a personal line of credit. Not a mortgage, but a $30,000 loan. He used your name as a listed guarantor. When my friend mentioned it, I thought maybe you'd agreed to help him again. But the way Brent pushed for discretion, the way the paperwork was worded, she got suspicious. Dorothy's mind reeled. Are you saying he forged my name on a loan? Caroline leaned in. The signature looked legit. Very legit. I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't seen it. But the kicker is, the documents were never filed under your address. He used a P.O. box. No official bank statements ever came to your home. That's why you didn't know. Dorothy's heart began to pound. Her throat tightened. And the loan? He defaulted, Caroline said softly. But the bank never chased you. Because the paperwork was never triggered to include you officially. Either he got lucky, or someone helped him make the documents look valid enough to get past initial checks, but not enough to hold up in court. Dorothy pressed a trembling hand to her chest. My God, I only found out recently when my friend told me Brent's name had resurfaced in another flagged application. When I asked what name he was using this time, she trailed off. Dorothy felt like the floor was shifting beneath her feet. A sickening mix of nausea and betrayal churned in her stomach. Her own son had already misused her name, quietly, illegally, and she hadn't even known. It wasn't just desperation, it was deception. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Caroline reached across the table again. I know this is a lot, but it gets worse. Dorothy looked up slowly, not sure how much more she could absorb. Brent doesn't have a job anymore, Caroline said. He was fired from the tech firm 2 months ago. There's no income, no severance. From what I've heard, he was let go for falsifying expense reports. Dorothy's eyes widened. Expense reports? He was submitting inflated receipts for travel and client dinners, Caroline explained. They caught him doctoring documentation. It didn't go to court. He signed a confidentiality agreement and left quietly. But people talk. Word got around. Dorothy stared at her. But he told me his salary alone could cover the mortgage. He said he just needed me on paper. Caroline shook her head. There's no salary, Dorothy. There's no plan. He's in free fall. Dorothy sat in stunned silence, her body rigid with tension. The room seemed to close in on her, the edges of her vision narrowing. She couldn't feel the table beneath her fingertips. She couldn't hear the clatter of dishes behind the counter. Her mind echoed with one awful, persistent truth. He lied. Again and again. Not just small lies. Not just omissions. Deep, deliberate, life-altering deceit. He had used her name. Forged her signature, risked her financial future, twice. And now he was pretending everything was fine, all while standing on a crumbling foundation of lies. Dorothy struggled to catch her breath. He looked me in the eye, she whispered, and told me everything was secure, that I had nothing to worry about. Caroline's voice was gentle but firm. He's drowning, Dorothy, and he's trying to pull you under with him. Dorothy gripped the edge of the table. I don't even know who he is anymore. Caroline didn't reply. She just sat with her, letting the silence speak for what couldn't be said. After several long moments, Dorothy finally pushed back her chair. Thank you for telling me. I need to get home. There's something I have to do. Duh, sighed Caroline stood too, her eyes full of sympathy. Please be careful. He's not thinking straight. Desperation changes people. Dorothy nodded absently, already reaching for her keys. Her thoughts spun wildly, colliding into one another. As she stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the wind caught the edge of her coat, but she barely felt it. She was too busy trying to process the nightmare unraveling around her. And for the first time in her life, she realized Brent wasn't just making mistakes. He was dangerous. The locksmith arrived just after sunrise. Dorothy had called first thing in the morning, her voice steady but resolute. Within an hour, every lock in the house had been changed, doors, windows, even the garage. The man, a quiet, middle-aged technician with kind eyes, didn't ask many questions, but he gave her a gentle nod as he handed her the new keys. Sometimes peace of mind is worth more than security itself. Dorothy smiled faintly, holding the cold metal in her hand like a weapon. That's exactly what I'm paying for. Next, she drove to her bank. The manager, a warm man named Gerald, who'd known her and Harold for over 2 decades, greeted her with surprise. Mrs. Harper, everything all right? I need to make some changes, she said, calm but direct. Remove Brent Harper from any and all emergency contact lists, and I want to put additional safeguards on my accounts. No withdrawals over $5,000 without my physical presence and identification. Gerald's brows rose slightly, but he didn't question her. He simply nodded. Understood. It took just under an hour, but when Dorothy left, she felt lighter, stronger. Her next stop was her attorney's office. Benjamin Scott had handled her and Harold's estate planning for years. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his early 50s, with a dry wit and a reputation for protecting his clients like a hawk. I want to update my will, she told him, sitting across from his mahogany desk. And I want to add a provision barring Brent Harper from contesting it. Benjamin didn't blink. Would you like to remove him as a beneficiary altogether? Yes, she said. He's no longer my dependent, and I have reason to believe he may attempt to manipulate my assets. I want it all airtight. He nodded and made notes. We'll add a no-contest clause, and we'll secure your medical power of attorney and financial proxy as well. Make it Gloria, she said. She's the one who shows up. By noon, it was done. The locks were changed, the accounts secured, The will revised. Dorothy returned home, her mind buzzing with action. There was still so much she didn't know. But one thing was now certain. Brent was no longer welcome in her life, not until he faced her with the truth. She didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast golden shadows across her driveway, Brent's black SUV pulled up. He stepped out, phone in hand, sunglasses pushed up onto his head, the casual arrogance practically radiating off of him. Dorothy stood in the doorway, arms crossed. He didn't even knock. He reached for the doorknob and found it locked. He frowned, tried again, then looked up and met her eyes. "You changed the locks?" he asked, incredulous. "I did," she said evenly. He stepped back, arms spread. "Seriously? What the hell is going on?" "I'd ask you the same thing," she said. "But I already know." Brent's expression darkened. "Is this about the paperwork? The house? Because if you're upset—" "You forged my signature," she interrupted, her voice sharp. That stopped him. For a beat, he said nothing. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said finally. Dorothy laughed, cold, humorless. "Don't insult my intelligence, Brent. I found the papers. The ones you slipped into my living room, the ones with the backdated signature." He narrowed his eyes. "You're being paranoid." "I'm being informed," she snapped. "And you no longer have access to my home, my accounts, or my life." Brent's mask began to slip. His voice rose. "So that's it? After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" Dorothy felt something inside her harden. "What exactly have you done for me, Brent? Lied? Snuck into my house? Risked everything your father and I built for a beach house you can't afford?" He took a step closer, his jaw clenched. "You have no idea what kind of pressure I'm under. And that justifies fraud?" "It's not fraud," he shouted. "It's family. It's called trust." Dorothy shook her head slowly. "No, Brent. Trust is earned, and you've burned every ounce of it." He was breathing hard now, pacing slightly. "If you think you can just cut me out, rewrite your will, change your locks, think again. I have rights." No," she said quietly. "You have choices, and you've made the wrong ones." Brent stopped pacing and glared at her. "This isn't over." Dorothy stared back, unblinking. "That's where you're wrong. It's over for me." He gave a cold laugh. "Fine, but if you want to make this public, we'll do it in court. I'll sue you. Defamation, emotional distress, damaging the family name." Dorothy stepped forward, her voice like ice. "You already did that, Brent, when you tried to steal from me, when you thought I was too old or too soft to fight back." They stood in silence, mother and son on opposite sides of a line that could never be uncrossed. Brent turned without another word, slammed the car door, and sped down the street. Dorothy didn't flinch, not this time. That night, the house was still, but Dorothy couldn't rest. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from adrenaline still coursing through her system. She sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of herbal tea, the confrontation with Brent replaying over and over in her mind like a cracked record. She had thought that was the end of it, until her phone buzzed. A new email. The subject line read, "Legal action notice, breach of verbal agreement." She frowned, heart skipping, and opened it. The sender claimed to be from Cresswell and Marsh LLP, a law firm she'd never heard of. The message was formal, bristling with legal jargon, but the intent was clear. If she did not honor her verbal commitment to co-sign the mortgage by Friday, Brent would be forced to take legal action for financial damages and breach of trust. Dorothy stared at the screen, the words swimming in front of her eyes. Verbal commitment? She hadn't made any such thing. She'd specifically said she needed time. She'd never agreed, not in person, not in writing, and certainly not officially. She forwarded the email to Benjamin Scott, her attorney, and waited. He called within 10 minutes. "That's not a legitimate firm," he said bluntly. "I just checked. No such entity registered. This is a scare tactic." Dorothy exhaled slowly, gripping the phone. "Then who sent it?" "My guess," Benjamin said, voice darkening, "it's from Brent or Melanie. Designed to look real enough to intimidate you into compliance." Dorothy rubbed her forehead. "Is that even legal?" "Not even remotely," Benjamin said. If we can trace the IP or get proof, it's fraud and impersonation. You're doing the right thing forwarding it. Don't respond directly." As she hung up, a strange sensation began to bloom in her chest. Not fear, not even shock, but a cold, steady rage. They weren't just pushing, they were fabricating, lying, weaponizing her own sense of duty. She turned on her laptop, determined to get ahead of the next move. As she sifted through her files and emails for anything Brent might use, a new notification popped up. A file transfer link from an unfamiliar address. She hesitated, then clicked. A single audio file. Dorothy hit play. "Of course I'll help you, sweetheart. Just send over the paperwork." It was her voice. She felt the blood drain from her face. The file played again, and again she heard herself. Her words twisted into an agreement she'd never made. The tone was calm, trusting, but it was cut off, unnatural, as if it had been stitched together from multiple conversations. Her hand shook as she paused the recording. Brent. He had recorded her, and worse, he had edited it. She opened a folder where she saved her voicemails and notes. A few weeks back, Brent had casually mentioned their conversations were helpful to keep records for real estate stuff. She hadn't thought anything of it, but now it was obvious. He'd been gathering pieces, manipulating her words, constructing a false narrative. Dorothy stood, pushing away from the table. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, not from panic, but from fury. She walked to the living room, flicked on the light, and looked at the framed photos along the mantel. One of them showed Brent as a toddler in her arms, his chubby hand curled around her thumb. She reached for it and slowly turned it face down. The betrayal wasn't just in what he did, it was in how calculated it was. Melanie's forged emails, Brent's fake recordings. All of it was a coordinated attack on her finances, her peace, and her very identity. And it ended now. The next morning, Dorothy returned to Benjamin's office with the email, the audio file, and the full chain of text messages. He reviewed everything, brows furrowed. "This is more serious than I thought," he said. "We're going to document every single item. If they continue down this path, we can counter with a civil suit for harassment, defamation, and attempted fraud." Dorothy nodded. "Do it. I want everything in writing. A formal cease and desist letter sent to both of them. If they try anything else, I want a restraining order ready to file." Benjamin looked up, surprised but impressed. Dorothy's voice was calm. "No more waiting. No more hoping he comes around. I've made too many excuses for too long." She stood, taller than he'd ever seen her. Something in her had hardened, but not bitterly, purposefully. She wasn't retreating into fear anymore. She was preparing for battle. The truth had weight. Dorothy could feel it now, not as a burden, but as armor. She sat beside Benjamin Scott at his long oak conference table, surrounded by folders and open laptops. Each document, every screenshot, each email string, they weren't just files anymore. They were protection. They were power. "This," Benjamin said, holding up a printed spreadsheet, "is a summary of Brent's revolving credit debt. 3 cards maxed out, over $78,000 in total. Caroline confirmed them against his bankruptcy filings." Dorothy didn't blink. "He said he had no debt, that he was financially secure." Benjamin gave a dry laugh. "He's leveraged to the edge. His application for that Charleston house wasn't just declined, it was flagged. No bank would have touched him without a cosigner." Caroline had dropped off the documents in person, her expression serious. "You're doing the right thing, Dorothy," she'd said. "Don't let him guilt you. He's not just drowning. He's trying to pull others down with him." Dorothy thought back to the wide-eyed, sweet boy Brent used to be, the one who cried at cartoons and brought her handmade cards on Mother's Day. She held that memory for a moment, then let it go. The man asking her to risk her life savings was not that child. She shifted her focus to the next task, building a case strong enough to stop Brent cold. That same afternoon, Gloria, her neighbor, stopped by holding her phone like a smoking gun. "You're going to want to see this," she said, scrolling through a series of photos. Dorothy leaned in. The picture showed Brent at a high-end steakhouse downtown, grinning, glass of red wine in hand, wearing what looked like a $1,000 watch. Another showed him at a boutique, credit card mid-swipe. The card was matte black, unmistakably elite. "These were from last week," Gloria said. "My granddaughter follows that food blogger. Brent's face popped up in her stories. He's not exactly hiding." Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "He claims he can't pay rent without help." Gloria snorted. "Looks like he's eating better than both of us." Dorothy took the photos and forwarded them to Benjamin, who added them to the growing evidence file. "If he sues you," he said, "these will help prove he's not acting in good faith. He's posturing, not suffering." Later that night, Dorothy opened Instagram on her old iPad. She hadn't used the app in months, but curiosity burned. She searched Melanie's profile, @MelInTheCity. It was public. The images hit like punches. A new Louis Vuitton tote. Spa day at Serenity Hills and self-care queen. Dinner at a rooftop bar. Date night in the clouds. A caption under a picture of a crystal-encrusted cocktail read, "Manifesting Abundance." Dorothy stared at the photos, heat building behind her eyes. These weren't people desperate to survive. These were people desperate to perform. She took screenshots. Dozens. Each one another nail in the coffin Brent was trying to build around her. Then she clicked out of the app and opened a blank page on her laptop. Herald Foundation. Draft proposal. She began typing. The idea had come to her in pieces. Late at night, walking past Harold's old reading chair. He had always dreamed of giving back, of creating a fund for late-in-life learners like her. Women who put their families first and their dreams last. Women like her. The Herald Foundation would offer small grants to women over 50, seeking second careers, education, or new beginnings. It wouldn't be much at first, but it would be real. It would be hers. As she typed, something shifted deep inside her, a final transformation. She wasn't writing in reaction to Brent. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was rebuilding. By the end of the week, the foundation had a name, a mission, and a bank account. Dorothy put in the seed money, $10,000 from her savings. It was the first time she'd spent money on something just for herself, or rather, for women like her. Benjamin helped her file the legal documents. "This is smart," he said, "very smart, not just generous, empowering. It sends a message." Dorothy nodded. "It's not about Brent anymore. It's about what I want my legacy to be." She looked out the window of his office, past the line of trees shimmering in the late afternoon light. It was time to stop living in fear of what her son might do, and start living in truth about who she was, and who she could still become. It started with a knock on the back door. Dorothy opened it to find Janet standing there, her face tight with urgency, clutching a wrinkled envelope in one hand and a manila folder in the other. "I have something you need to see," she said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. Dorothy led her to the kitchen, sensing this wasn't going to be a casual neighborhood update. Janet sat down, placed the folder between them, and exhaled sharply. "I asked my niece, she's in insurance compliance, to look into something that's been gnawing at me ever since Melanie started flashing those spa trips and designer bags." Dorothy raised an eyebrow. What did she find? Janet opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents stamped confidential and a scanned report bearing Melanie's full name. She was under investigation 5 years ago for submitting fake medical reimbursement claims, claimed she needed out-of-network procedures for a rare condition. But turns out the providers she listed didn't even exist. Dorothy leaned forward, stunned. "She never got formally charged," Janet continued. "The case was quietly dropped after Brent showed up with a lawyer and settled the matter. My niece said it stinks of a payoff." Dorothy stared at the file, bile rising in her throat. "She's done this before." "Yep," Janet said, "and your son made it disappear. That was strike 1. Dorothy's hands clenched around her mug. "What's strike 2? Janet slid the envelope across the table. "Came in the mail today. No return address. I opened it because it was just marked for Margaret's neighbor. Thought it was junk." Inside were printed emails and a hand-scrawled note. "You deserve to know who you raised." Dorothy read the note twice, then turned to the first email. It was between two employees at Brent's former tech firm. The subject line, Harper's betrayal. As she scanned the emails, her stomach dropped. Brent had been on a team working on a product launch. One of his colleagues had discovered a coding flaw that could have derailed the entire release. Brent took the discovery to upper management, framing it as his own, and blamed the delay on the colleague who originally reported it. 3 weeks later, Brent got promoted. The colleague was put on performance review and eventually laid off. Dorothy pressed a hand to her chest. He ruined someone's career. Janet nodded solemnly. And he did it to get ahead. That's who he is now. Dorothy stood up, pacing the kitchen. The weight of these new truths pressed down on her, but it wasn't crushing. It was clarifying. Every thread was unraveling the myth she'd been holding on to. Brent wasn't just desperate, he was dangerous. Not in a physical way, but in the quiet, calculated ways that left scars no one could see. And Melanie, not just complicit, but practiced. She was a partner in the deception. The two of them weren't spiraling by accident. They were architects of their own collapse. Dorothy, Janet said gently, you're not just protecting yourself anymore. You're protecting every woman who thinks love makes this kind of behavior forgivable. Dorothy turned to her, breath shallow. How did I not see it? Because you raised him with love. And love doesn't expect betrayal. She sat back down, letting the silence settle. But it wasn't the kind of silence that followed devastation. It was the kind that came just before resolve. She looked at the Herald Foundation paperwork again on her desk. This was the legacy. Not Brent's beach house, not his illusions, her. She was the legacy, and she was just getting started. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Dorothy walked through its glass doors, flanked by Benjamin and Gloria, her heels tapping a steady rhythm against the floor. Her heart beat slow and firm, not with fear, but with finality. Brent was already seated at the plaintiff's table, dressed in an ill-fitting gray suit. He looked thinner than she remembered, but the sharp glint of entitlement still flickered behind his eyes. He didn't look at her as she took her seat across the room. The judge entered promptly at 9:02 a.m. He was a stern-looking man with steel gray hair and a voice that left no room for performance. Mr. Brent Harper v. Ms. Dorothy Harper claiming damages for breach of verbal agreement and financial loss. Proceed. Brent's lawyer, a young man who seemed more eager than experienced, rose and began to outline the case. My client was given a verbal commitment, he said. He made financial decisions based on that trust. When the agreement was broken, it caused irreparable harm, financially and emotionally. Dorothy didn't flinch. Benjamin leaned in. Let them hang themselves on their own rope, he whispered. Brent took the stand next. His performance was polished, even tearful at moments. He painted himself as a loyal son, misled and abandoned by his aging mother. She said she'd help, he insisted. She told me to send the paperwork. I wouldn't have placed a deposit if I didn't believe her. But under cross-examination, his cracks began to show. Benjamin stood and approached with the confidence of a seasoned predator. Mr. Harper, do you have a recording of this alleged verbal agreement? Brent hesitated. No, but I do have a compilation of conversations. Benjamin held up the analysis report from a forensic audio expert, a file that has been confirmed to be spliced and manipulated. Are you still submitting that as evidence? Brent's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. No, Brent muttered. Benjamin nodded. You also claim your mother's refusal caused you financial distress. Yet you continued to use a platinum credit card for luxury dining and vacations during this period, correct? Brent's jaw clenched. Benjamin held up screenshots. These were posted by your wife Melanie on Instagram. Would you care to explain? No further questions, Benjamin said, turning back to the defense table. Then came Dorothy's turn. She walked to the stand with deliberate calm. Her voice never wavered. She recounted each event clearly. The visit, the pressure, the forged documents, the manipulated audio. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The truth stood taller than any performance. "I didn't say no out of spite," she said. "I said no because I was asked to risk everything I had built over 50 years on a lie." Caroline testified next. She laid out Brent's financial record, his debts, his bankruptcy, the falsified mortgage application. "He told me once," she said quietly, "that his mother would never say no, that she was too proud of him." Gloria followed, sharing the photos of Brent's lavish spending and Melanie's history of fraud. "They didn't come to Dorothy with love," she said. "They came with a plan." Finally, Gerald, the bank manager, explained the cosigner clause. If Mr. Harper defaulted, Ms. Harper would have been liable for the entire loan. The request was not a formality, it was a trap. The judge sat in silence for a moment after the testimonies ended. Then he looked at Brent. "Mr. Harper, you filed a lawsuit based on an unverifiable verbal exchange, produced falsified audio, and presented no credible documentation. In contrast, your mother has provided overwhelming evidence of coercion, deception, and financial manipulation." He turned to Dorothy. "This court finds in favor of the defendant." Benjamin exhaled slowly. Dorothy didn't move. The judge continued, "Furthermore, the plaintiff is ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees in full, totaling $43,720. Gasps echoed through the room. Brent's face turned white. His lawyer sat stone still. Dorothy stood, adjusted her shawl, and turned away from the stand. She didn't glance at her son, not out of cruelty, but closure. There was nothing more to see. After the ruling, the courtroom emptied slowly, murmurs and shocked whispers trailing behind the verdict like smoke. Dorothy stood still for a moment, feeling everything and nothing all at once. Her muscles, clenched for weeks, began to loosen. Benjamin turned to her. "You did it. It's over." But it wasn't. Not quite. A court officer approached them near the hallway. "Miss Harper," he said softly, "there's one more matter." She followed him to a side room, a quiet office tucked behind the courtroom. Inside, a woman from the district attorney's office stood waiting with a folder in hand. "We've reviewed the evidence from your case," the woman said, "especially the audio manipulation, the falsified emails, and the attempt to coerce you into signing under false pretenses. These fall under Tennessee's elder financial exploitation statutes." Dorothy blinked. "You mean this is criminal?" "Yes, ma'am. Civil courts can't address intent, but we can. If you're willing to cooperate, we may open a criminal investigation." For a moment, Dorothy's breath caught. "Criminal charges against her son? I need time," she whispered. The woman nodded. "Of course. We'll follow up within a week." Back home, Dorothy sank into her reading chair. The weight of the morning began to settle in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was peace or emptiness. The phone buzzed. A text from Janet. "You were magnificent. Dinner at mine tonight. I'll bring wine." She smiled faintly. Then a knock on the door. It wasn't Janet. It was a courier. "Delivery for Ms. Harper," he said, handing her a plain envelope. "No return address." Inside, a letter in Brent's handwriting. "You may have won in court, but you've destroyed me. I lost everything, my wife, my career, my future. You think this makes you strong? No, Mom, it makes you heartless. You were supposed to protect me, not humiliate me. I hope one day you understand what you've done." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just blame, pure and venomous. Dorothy read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into the drawer where she kept old birthday cards. Not to revisit, just to file away. Melanie, as it turned out, had disappeared. 2 days after the ruling, Dorothy got a call from Caroline. "She's gone," Caroline said. "Packed a bag and left. No one knows where. Brent's been calling everyone. Begging." Dorothy listened in silence. The collapse was complete. Later that night, she stood in her backyard, breathing in the warm Nashville air. The roses were in bloom again, soft pink and almost defiantly alive. This was what Harold would have wanted, not the mansion in Charleston, not the courtroom drama, but this quiet moment, this reclaimed peace. Some children, Dorothy realized, were not meant to be held onto. They were lessons in disguise, and she had finally learned hers.